My name is Autumn Whiteway. My spiritual name is Night Singing Woman, a name gifted to me by Elder Clarence Wolflag. I'm Saulteaux Metis. I belong to Berens River First Nation in Manitoba, but I was born and raised here in Calgary, or Mohkinstsis.
Awesome.
So I've lived here all my life, except for a brief stint in Winnipeg for school.
What did you study in school?
Archaeology. I have 3 degrees in archaeology or archaeology-related topics.
3?
Yes.
What are they in?
I have a master's in anthropology that was concentrating in archaeology. I have a Bachelor of Science honors concentrating in physical anthropology, and a Bachelor of Arts with distinction in Greek and Roman studies. And that was focused in archaeology as well.
Whoa.
And I was nearly given a PhD during my master's thesis defense.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was a process that existed at University of Winnipeg, but not at University of Manitoba, where I was doing my master's degree.
So, okay.
So they were trying to get a PhD for me, but just couldn't.
Do you see a PhD in the future?
I would love to do a PhD. I feel like since I got it started kind of older as a student at the age of 26, and I was in university for 10 years, I feel like it's time to start my career, but I'd love to be a lifelong student, and I'd love to do a PhD on the archaeology of body modification and Indigenous tattooing practices.
That'd be deadly.
Yeah.
How did you find archaeology of Greek and Roman versus here in Canada?
It's very different. Here in Canada, I'm a permit holding archaeologist, and I do cultural resource management, which is very different than those academic excavations in other parts of the world where they are using finer tools and they are digging carefully. Here, it's not, archaeology isn't done for archaeology's sake. It's often paid for by industry, so they want everything done yesterday, and it's mostly done with shovels. So there isn't that attention to detail that's allowed to happen here.
Do you hope to see that attention to detail come in?
I would love that. I would love for archaeology to be something that the government would take pride in, and maybe even become something that could be paid for by tourism rather than by industry. And I would love to see that attention to detail and archaeology done for archaeology's sake. Perhaps more Indigenous archaeologists and if people from those bands that are in the area that are stewards of those lands being involved in those excavations.
That'd be cool. They probably know where it all is.
Yeah.
How important is it to have an Indigenous voice, specifically the bands in which the archaeology is happening, to have a voice in those projects?
I think it's extremely important, and I've endured racism, I feel, in archaeology. It's there's a lot of gatekeeping. Whenever I've put out there on my resume that I'm an Indigenous archaeologist, I have fewer opportunities, essentially, and I've been kept out of jobs, say, with traditional knowledge. Those are kind of jobs that are hoarded by non-Indigenous people traditionally, and things are finally starting to change. So it's good that they're starting to include some of those voices. One of my friends did an amazing project on the East Coast, and her father owned a company, and they hired I think 60 Maliseet people to learn archaeology to work on that project. And then they were able to get EI, and in their off time then they did some schooling related to archaeology. And I feel that's so important. Often we have to have Indigenous monitors on site while we're doing certain projects, and what I saw was some racism, or people were thinking that Indigenous people on site will hold back progress if they find anything. So those are attitudes that need to change, and what I did with some of those Indigenous monitors when I was working on a project in Manitoba is I included them. I showed them a map of what a flake looks like, which is kind of some of the pieces that shatter off when making a stone tool. So there's very definitive marks that show that it's man-made. So I showed them that, and when they were picking through wheelbarrows, found their first flakes. One of them came to me and said, "This is." He compared it to the birth of his firstborn child. That's how important it was to him. Seeing something that his ancestors touched thousands of years ago that had just been unearthed. So that's why I feel it's important. It's really important to have those voices involved, and because some of the interpretations, modern interpretations that don't come from an Indigenous lens, may be incorrect.
That would be so cool or that's so cool how you involved them.
Yeah, just their reactions was amazing to me.
I couldn't imagine not showing them if it's.
Yeah, they were
Or,
specifically told they couldn't help, which is really tragic. To just have them stand on the sidelines. But that was years ago, so things are changing. Hopefully, they keep changing for the better.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about how I'd feel if I was kind of if I had like a piece like that.
Yeah.
That's cool about the East Coast, though.
Mm-hmm. In
Is
the Arctic, you don't even really have to dig too much because a lot of the stuff is on the surface or in caches. So, um, one thing that my professor taught me is in the Arctic, you can go out at a certain hour when the sunlight's hitting in just a certain way and things just glitter on the landscape, and that's how you find artifacts.
in the wintertime
Um,
or in the
I'm,
summer?
I'm guessing more in the summer.
Yeah, the wintertime.
I don't think that
Snow
they
blindness
go.
hurts.
Yeah, I don't think they go out and do any archaeology in the wintertime there.
It used to be hard with all the
Yeah.
snow and ice.
I am not a fan of winter archaeology. When the ground is frozen, it's very hard and you have to try to melt the soil.
Permafrost.
It's hard on your body.
I bet. That's so 3 degrees, and they tried to give you a pH.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry, I'm mind blown. I'm thinking about it all.
It was a lot of schooling, but I loved every moment of it because I worked so hard to get to that point. Like as an Indigenous person, you often have to work so much harder to get to a certain point, and then um, there's struggles along the way with my master's degree. So yeah,
I bet.
I feel like I won. The fact that I was able to get those 3 degrees, I won.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
It's actually a thing they were talking about over at Mount Royal is some Indigenous students will have a hard time in the Indigenous Studies courses.
I believe that. When I was going through my schooling, all the Indigenous courses were taught by non-Indigenous professors. So
I bet that was difficult.
yeah, I actually didn't take a lot of those courses. I was focused more on the Middle East. Um, there was actually at the first university I went to, there was more of a specialization, it seemed, in Mesoamerica.
Oh.
So I think that's why I went a little bit more towards the Greek and Roman studies path, because those were both cultures that existed in the Middle East.
Did you go to dig sites over there?
Yeah, it was actually my first excavation ever. When was that? I think in 2007 or 2008, in Jordan. It was a field school, and I was made a supervisor because of my grades and my all the courses I had taken. So that was intense. It was about 17 hours a day. I learned a lot. So it we had what we called a field. So there was 4 different excavations happening in that field. Each square was 5 by 5 meters. So I was in charge of my square, and then um, several students and local workers as well. Some of them were Bedouin people. So it was an incredible first experience. I was just like thrown right into it. And then I had archaeological permits for my own research in Jordan, with the Bedouin people doing ethnoarchaeology of their mortuary practices. And so I actually had permits that said Dr. Autumn Whiteway, which was pretty neat. And then I was able to go inside the Petra site with a vehicle to get to some of the more distant Bedouin people. The Bedouin occupied that very important site until the 80s when they were removed, but some still live on the outskirts.
What were some of the coolest things you found out there?
Ooh, um, so in Jordan we found a Canaan blade, so it's like a knife made out of stone. Um, we found a pendant. There was a pot, the bottom of a pot that was probably about this big. There was a body in the next square over. So I was kind of hoping for that in my site, because one of my specializations is human osteology and physical anthropology, but it sounds terrible. I didn't get lucky that time. But yeah, and then with my own research, just everything was amazing. I was doing qualitative and quantitative research, so I was studying 20 Bedouin cemeteries, but I also did about 140 interviews with Bedouin people of all age ranges, split between men and women.
That's intense.
Yeah, so I got a lot of historical perspective, and then I actually wanted to do a documentary as well. That would be a cultural exchange, because I heard so many similar stories of colonization, um, and just how their life had changed throughout time to the Indigenous experience here. So it would have been amazing, something that I'd still like to do in the future.
Has it influenced your work here in Canada? Like
Yeah, I feel like anytime you travel, it influences who you are as a person. You learn so much about yourself and the world around you. And so I worked for quite a few seasons in Jordan with the Bedouin, but I also did a lot of overlanding travel throughout the world as well. So, like, all across Central Asia, China and Mongolia, through South America, through the Middle East, and then individual countries as well. But um, just a lot of camping across and driving across those landscapes so that I could really connect with the people themselves. Because I don't like the cruise or all inclusive type vacation where you're so disconnected from the culture of where you're at and the lands where you're at.
that must have been awesome.
Yeah, I think one of my coolest experiences was at some standing stones in Mongolia, and it really made me think about some of the medicine wheels here in Alberta, which there's a really important one here in Majorville, or near Majorville, and just why people select certain areas for different monuments, especially stone monuments. I feel like they hold energies, and I really felt those energies in Mongolia just being near those stones. So I could guess I take that from my travels and apply it to archaeology here, or just looking at why people will select certain regions for different things.
You learn all these different ways of looking at the box.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you get to like really get? I'm a huge religion nut.
Yeah.
Like that's my shtick too. So I was obsessed with like the interplay between Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism in China.
Yeah.
Did you get a good look into all that?
Yeah, I really did. And Taoism was kind of interesting. Some of the temples that I visited, and they just displayed a lot of statues of different ways to be tortured. um, but yeah,
Yeah.
I love that, visiting them, and I don't think I experienced as much of the Confucianism, but
That one's kind of like, it's a little bit older.
yeah.
The-
And one thing I found the most interesting is I spent most of my time in Western China, so the Muslim part
oh.
of China.
Oh.
Yeah, so we traveled across from there. I was restarting a trip that I ended in Kyrgyzstan, just across the border in China, and then I actually mostly went because one of my main interests is mummies. And
Really?
so my favorite mummies are the Chinese mummies and the Greenlandic mummies because you can see their markings still, and they're so well preserved. So
You
I,
can
I
still see
went
the
to
markings?
what's that?
You can still see the markings?
Yeah, yeah. One of them still has paint on its face, and they're just perfectly preserved. One of them even had its eyes preserved, and it was looking deep into my soul. I've never seen a mummy preserved that well. So, yeah, I went to visit those, and then I continued on my travels, the overlanding. So, I usually do it through an overlanding company. So they have a truck with equipment for camping and um, kitchen supplies, and then we just pull up in different places along the way.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's the best way to travel.
I bet you learned so much, like you were saying.
I did, yeah. And then learning to communicate with people when you can't actually communicate with them verbally is, I find it fun. It's challenging but fun.
What was the most effective way?
Hmm. Or probably with hands a lot, and then also, if you do learn a few words, then people really appreciate it. Often calculators. I mean, well,
Calculators?
yeah, I guess you can do it on your phone now, but calculators are an effective means sometimes.
Whoa.
In China, it was actually easier because they use WeChat, or they were at that time. So it had a built in translator. So it just say, that was 2015. I just say what I wanted to say, and then it would translate it for them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I
Yeah.
like that. Video games. Video games. Perpetuates violence.
Does.
Yeah. Hero's journey.
I'm trying to keep my son away from it as long as possible.
Oh, good luck.
I know.
Good luck. I was sucked in for years. I just got out.
The problem is my partner's super into video games, so I'm sure
Uh-huh.
like he wants to do that with him.
They're so addictive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to make a choice: school or video games.
Oh.
I got lucky.
Between those two, I'd probably do video games too.
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate school until I was out of school.
Really?
Yeah.
So, what was your the journey? Like, what was your calling back to school?
Um, well, I guess I had a really difficult time growing up in school. I didn't fit in. I was ostracized for being different and looking different. I grew up in the punk rock scene and the ska scene, and so I just didn't want to go there. Eventually, I ended up at an alternative school, high school, and that was amazing. That's when I came out of my shell, um, and started interacting with people. um, but yeah, when I finished high school, I think I was just tired because I was going to school full time, working full time, and so I don't know what my calling was. I had a list of things I wanted to do when I was growing up. I read a lot, so I wanted to be an archaeologist, a paleontologist, an entomologist, a herpetologist, or a veterinarian. That was my list. So eventually I kind of went back to the one I wanted to do as a child, which was archaeology or paleontology. And originally I was going to go do my degree at University of Calgary in archaeology and then go up to Edmonton for paleontology. But then I ended up pursuing 3 degrees. I thought I would just be an average student, even though I did really well in my education. But in grade 1, they were assessing me for being learning disabled. But then I kind of ended up at the top of my class in university. So, um, yeah, there's when you're taking something that you want to do, it's different.
Yeah, I bet even like the coming out of the shell and into the traveling is
Yeah, yeah.
that's great. So what do you think younger you then would say, or when you were a child you would say if they could sit here and listen to your stories of traveling the world and all these degrees and
I would probably tell myself that everything's going to be okay because it just seemed so tumultuous when I was a teenager. And I mean, I had those thoughts of self harm and all of that. I didn't think I would make it to the age 23, for example. And I would just say, like, life turns out amazing. It's gonna be hard. It's not gonna be easy at all, but it's gonna be amazing. You're gonna take some amazing journeys. You're gonna get a great education, and you're gonna push the boundaries and um, further than a lot of Indigenous people do, and then hopefully be a role model for people to keep pushing those boundaries and see what they can accomplish.
trailblazing.
Yeah.
It's badass. Do you ever see yourself becoming like a professor?
I was actually studying to become a professor, but then I kept hearing what it's like to be a professor from my professors, and I thought, oh, well, maybe this isn't so amazing. You're on call 24/7. Not that I'm not right now with my career as a entrepreneur, but it's for me. So yeah, it was 24/7. There's a lot of demands. You have to constantly publish. There's a saying, publish or perish. Um, and you might be writing a grant application for 4 months and not get the grant, and so you've lost 4 months of your life. And yeah, it's just very, very demanding, and they seemed very stressed, and they often wanted to leave their jobs. And there's a lot of rejection, especially when you're applying to get those professorships or tenure track professorship. There's you're competing against a lot of people. There's a lot more people nowadays with PhDs. So um, yeah, it's hard to get all that rejection.
I bet.
Yeah. And
That's
I
what I
probably
want to
wouldn't be
be.
able to stay where I love, which is where I grew up. I left here for Winnipeg for school, and I was so excited to leave Calgary. Then when I got back, I realized what I had.
You missed
Being
it.
near the mountains, yeah.
That's how I feel about the tundra.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Tired of the
understandable.
trees and the grass.
Yeah.
My parents, when we first moved to Nova Scotia, when I was like just 4 years old, 3 years old. Oh, I don't remember, a long time ago.
Yeah.
But they put me on a blanket on the middle of the grass, and I would just run around the blanket, but I wouldn't leave it. I wouldn't go on the
Oh.
grass.
It's too much for you.
Yeah.
I actually, when I was doing my master's, I got assigned a topic to teach my class about cognitive archaeology. And so some of the premises are just like wondering why people have kind of started to adopt religion.
That's
Like
cool.
it's a very abstract way of thinking, things like that. And then also um, going back to when humans came out of Africa, it looks at how the brain developed. So one of the articles that I assigned people, I feel like it was saying um, people are hardwired to the environment they would pick would be the African savannah. And so
Really?
I wanted to test that. So I had it in my head. People probably want to grow up, or they would probably want to live where they grew up. That's where their happy memories are. So I tested it on my class, and it was Winnipeg. So a lot of the people picked that they would want to be in the boreal forest. I gave them 6 different environments, and then I picked the mountains because I grew up here next to the mountains. And one person picked the beach, but yeah, I feel like people, it's hardwired that they love where they grew up.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
I do not feel a connection to like the earth here,
Yeah.
but up there, I can
That's
fall
where
asleep
you
on the
have the
tundra.
strongest connection. Yeah. Yeah.
It
I
like
totally get that.
vibrates.
Mm-hmm.
But down here, it's like I don't. It's beautiful,
Yeah.
gorgeous,
Yeah.
but I don't have that connection.
Yeah.
But I haven't been like home, like Nunavut, in a long time. Like 6 years.
Oh wow, it's a long time.
Yeah.
I hope you can get back soon so you can feel that connection again.
I know, it's so weird. I never wanted to.
Yeah.
Also, like I have that same
Yeah,
like a
sometimes you have to leave to understand your connection
yeah,
with those lands.
making me miss it now too. Whalebone houses.
Yeah, whalebone houses.
That's insane.
Yeah, because there wasn't trees.
Yeah.
So you have to do something, and I feel like I don't know how much whalebone material there was on the shores, but it's interesting because kind of like the mouth area, like the jaw, from the images that I saw
I
of the
think I've seen
reconstructions,
those.
like that would be kind of a doorway, and then there would be a like they'd burrow under it,
Okay.
probably some of the ribs.
They still have like a prevalent hunting, like whale hunting system going on.
Yeah, yeah. I know one of my professors has been, or former professors was involved in some of the whale hunts.
They're
So,
hardcore.
and it just sounds like such an amazing experience, and just the organization behind it sounds really incredible.
The full community.
Yeah,
It's so good too.
yeah.
It's really I just figured that'd be cool.
I've never tried any because I'm vegetarian. I've been probably for like 28 years. But when I went to Iceland, they were having sour whale. It looks almost like a sour cream tub, and they just can buy it at the grocery store and eat sour whale, and then they have shark as well, which they hang up, and I think they used to let it rot for a few months and then eat it.
All fermented.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a bunch of fermented things. We
Yeah.
like the fat.
Yeah, People had to adapt to certain climates.
Has that influenced your art then? All that traveling and like discovering all that?
I'd say not as much my art, but more of my photography. So I actually didn't even have a camera until 2007 maybe. So some of my younger years of traveling, I either didn't have a camera or I borrowed my brother's camera, and but then I got my own good camera in 2007, and I'd take a lot of shots along the way, and when you take a lot of shots then some are bound to be good. So I've got some great shots from across my travels.
Do you have favorites?
Yeah, I do. I have this one from Syria where there was this ancient pillar, and there was some like vines hanging down, and then a cat just jumped onto the pillar and looked up and posed in between the vines. And it turned out amazing. It was a little bit fuzzy, so back in those days, in the early times of effects you could put on pictures, I put an effect on it to make it look like a painting, and it does. It looks amazing.
That's cool.
So yeah, that one, and I have another one of some Uzbek ladies, um, and they were actually doing a puppet show. So I paid to see the puppet show and take pictures, and uh, so they were showing us how their traditional weddings are, and so they were in beautiful clothing, and they were just laughing together beautifully. I love that photo too. Um,
That's deadly.
yeah, and I do some photos as part of my other artwork as well. So I'll take the photo and then I'll kind of do some digital art over top as well. So I use my photography now outside of travel more to do some of the activist art to highlight Indigenous issues.
That's hardcore.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about the puppet show still.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Do you ever get lots of questions about your own culture when you were out?
Yeah, and often at markets, non-Indigenous people, and then also when I teach in schools, I teach a lot with Jube School and Arts Commons, and then privately through some schools. So a lot of the kids are very curious, so they'll ask me questions, and I'm really open. If I'm wearing like a caribou tufted bracelet, I'll let them touch it, and I get a lot of questions. I'm not wearing it now, but about my medicine bag and what's in my medicine bag. So I'm very open to sharing and creating dialogues between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
That's a great outlook. It's hard to be sometimes, though.
Yeah, I know some of my friends have said they get exhausted. And I can feel that sometimes too, with always having to explain yourself. Or sometimes when you do land acknowledgements, it's the Indigenous people that are often asked to do the land acknowledgement, where it should be the other way around. Um, and yeah, just always having to teach people about yourself, your culture, or to love you for who you are can be exhausting. I've been lucky. I don't get that many that much negativity, but I've been at markets where people came and said, "I don't think you're going to get the land back," or
Like to your
things like
face?
that. Yeah, and I said, "I wasn't requesting it back." I have a piece that's about cultural appropriation, specifically at Halloween, and the hate that I got was actually I refused to look at the comments because I'm just very sensitive as a person. So I saw a lot of loves and thousands of shares. It went viral. But then there's the occasional person that puts the laughing emoji, which hurts my whole heart and soul. But I had a private message from somebody, and they were Indigenous, saying like, calling me all sorts of names, like, get this off the internet, people are upset about this. And then I had to say, I'm an Indigenous artist highlighting an Indigenous reality, and so don't talk to me that way. And then he said, oh, okay, I just read what somebody else read. So he didn't even
The
do
misinformation.
yeah, he didn't even look into it for himself. And all the information about it and what it was about was clearly in the post.
That's what frustrates me, is when they don't even read
Yeah.
or listen. Because I put it in video
Yeah.
form. Like, you could just listen.
The less people think critically. And I've even seen that from some academics who have gone after people I know as pretendians when they're not actually. And sometimes people will just believe anything that they hear, and they don't do the research, they don't go to the source to find out the accurate information. And I just see less and less, like, we just take everything at face value, and we can't believe everything that we see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's crazy because a lot of the misinformation too is easily just like, you can figure it out on Google a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Questions about culture. Did you get lots of questions about culture on your travels, like across the world?
Not really. More so in interviews I've done, but not really outside of that. Or I get questions from friends who know that I've traveled a lot. Um, they they also seem to think like I'm constantly on the move and just nomadic, but I kind of settled down more around 2015.
What would you be comfortable sharing all the art you do, like all the different mediums you share or create?
Yeah. So I guess I started actually doing some traditional crafts. So when I was in university, it was just such a left brain cultural institution that I felt like my life lacked so much creativity and disconnection from culture. So I started by learning drum making, finger weaving, dream catchers, and all that. And then I started painting, um, but I was still working in archaeology. So it was so much to bring big bags of paints and canvases. So I started bringing my iPad instead. And so I got more into digital art, and that's what I primarily do now. But I've done a lot of different things, like ecological art, where I'm using cattail fluff and pine cones and different things to make a piece of art. For example, I did one that was looks like a bison. Um, what else do I do? I do a lot of different crafts, and I sell at markets with my company Oji Creations. Um, and now I've done some installations as well. So I have an installation at Fort Calgary that was unveiled in 2022 for so-called Canada Day in a teepee at Fort Calgary. So, and that was for them to confront their colonial past. Um, and I have an installation coming up that'll take up a whole wall. I can't discuss it yet, but it's gonna be emotional. And I also do photography. Um, so yeah, a little bit of everything. I have a project I'm working, actually a couple projects I'm working on. So one of them is called Woodland Reimagined, and so I'm doing my woodland style art, which was kind of grandfathered by Norval Morrisseau in the 1960s, and it's a very 2D art form. So I'm kind of bringing it into the 3D realm, or else using new media that have never been used for this style of artwork. So I'm going to be doing some clay pieces, some quill work, embroidery, mosaic, stained glass, body painting, some rogue taxidermy, so all sorts of things. There's going to be 12 different pieces. And then I've also been learning a photography process from the 1800s called wet plate collodion, and I'm going to be starting to apply for some grants now that I've kind of learned the process and the chemistry. That was the photos that photographers like Edward Curtis used to capture Indigenous people who were thought to be a dying race. So some people love him, some people don't. Some people have told me that he had a lot of influence on how people were portrayed, but you often see that very stoic look. Some people say that's because they had to hold the pose for a few seconds, but I feel like he probably asked people not to smile. So I want to use that photographic process and work with the individuals that I'm going to capture their image of, and see how they would like to portray themselves in that process from the 1800s.
That's
Yeah.
wicked. Oh, wow. That's powerful stuff.
Yeah. I did just finish another project called History is Written by the Victors, where I had, I think it was 12 or 13 pieces. And it was all about turning colonial narratives on their head. And so I used a variety of media for that. I did a piece of rock art, a winter count on a hide. I did a lino cut, some digital art, a diorama. I did a wet plate photo, an installation, etc. And then each one was paired with an audio piece that was recorded in an Indigenous language and English as well. And that was kind of from the perspective of an Indigenous observer, or say like a scholar, anthropological scholar, who was kind of looking on non-Indigenous culture, or looking at things through a different lens in the process of colonization.
That's cool.
Yeah. I still have to get it onto my website.
What's been the most impactful project you've worked on?
I think some of my curatorial work would be the most impactful, because I like to look for emerging artists who have never had opportunities and give them opportunities, and help push them, and give them the tools that I was just learning a few years ago when I was starting out, but to help them along in their career. And some of those individuals now have their own companies and they're doing really well at markets. They're getting their own exhibitions, uh, and just the gratitude that I hear from them makes me feel so happy that they got those opportunities that I feel that they probably wouldn't have had in the colonial system. And um, sometimes we have to approach, so most of my curatorial work is Indigenous exhibitions, and we have to approach it differently. We can't have these really strict deadlines. um, Oftentimes with those exhibitions, they, if you email them a question, they won't get back to you. So um, I'm there for the people every step of the way to help them along, because not everybody knows how to go about this. This is often their first time. Um, and often my deadlines are kind of loose because people have their own schedules, and I do want to see them succeed. So I want them in the exhibition.
Wow. Yeah, there must be a lot of gratitude that
Yeah,
comes from that.
it started with a series of exhibitions. There's 3 exhibitions called Indigenous Motherhood and Matriarchy. So I had been asked by Making Treaty 7 Cultural Society um, to create some sort of exhibition in the future. Then the pandemic happened and there was some reorganization. So I did it independently uh, with another lady named Miriam, and we put together 3 exhibitions at 3 different locations, and each one had different content for the most part, but it just turned out amazing, and we were able to highlight a lot of different artists, Indigenous artists from across Turtle Island. Yeah. Now I work with Making Treaty 7 as their curator. So I curate the Artist of the Month, and then I do all their different exhibitions, the Artist of the Month exhibition, or whatever other exhibitions they want to do.
I don't. What's a curator's responsibilities?
It depends on in what capacity they're working. So there's museum curators. Essentially, a curator collects things.
Oh.
So collects and then manages collections. So in this capacity, a curator, an art curator, would kind of gather the artists. They would come up with the theme of the exhibition, put out the call for artists, help the artists if needed to get all the information about their artworks. I've even done virtual exhibitions that I put together, so picking wall colors virtually and hanging them on the wall virtually. And then I also do that in person as well at the galleries or um, wherever things are hanging. We've even done it at Theatre Calgary. So yeah, then I do the installation, and then opening. There's often media involved, and so that people come and look at the exhibition. And then there's the takedown, getting everything back to the artists, and often they're paid an artist fee as well. And then there's often grant applications that go along with it. So there's a whole process that goes along with each exhibition.
That must be cool to really watch it all come together.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's amazing because I go into the space. Maybe I've seen it in advance, maybe not, and then I put up all the artworks, um, and I don't have a plan in advance really. I just go in and I like switch things around. I look at what looks good, and I often have a weird little theme in my head that nobody else knows about. I explained this in another video where sometimes I do mirroring. So say I did a photography show, so this side was more the masculine energy, this side was the feminine energy, and then they came together as more of a neutral energy. And then on this side, some of the images were looking this direction, and they were this direction, looking. towards the center. So, and then on another wall, I had a series of images that just kind of worked out through the different phases of life. So, starting from infancy to childhood to adulthood and elderhood. So, I don't know, I don't go in with much of a plan, but it just kind of happens. And sometimes I feel like I'm guided in how things end up. But it's always amazing to sit back and look at it at the end. And if I had any doubts about it to start with, I never have doubts when I leave, because it just always looks amazing. And that's thanks to the artists.
That's deadly. I bet it helps a lot with the loose deadlines and the lack of pressure in a sense.
Yeah. Sometimes deadlines passed and I'm chasing artists, which they're often very grateful for, because they've just forgotten, or life happens and they just couldn't get to it. And in any other situation, they probably would have just lost that opportunity.
Wow. That would suck.
Yeah. I've lost one of those opportunities. I know from archaeology that they say people had a lot more free time in the past working in community. Like, people have different tasks they need to complete every day, and then you divvy the work up to a bunch of people, and then you get it done sooner. So they had a lot more time to relax and enjoy each other's company and raise their families as they should.
I keep just getting mind blown by this. You do so much.
Thank you.
So much. We have actually we have four. Yeah, we got 4 of your prints.
Yeah.
Just remember, like, listening to your story about, like, the grandfather. Oh, I don't want to butcher it, but the moon and the sun.
Oh, grandfather, sun, and grandmother moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in my mind. Well,
yeah, I did that one originally for there's a Instagram called Science Up First.
Oh.
And so I forget what they assigned me. I think storytelling in science. So that's the piece that I came up with for storytelling in science.
What is storytelling in science?
Well, I think that science from an Indigenous worldview was often transferred through story in the past.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know what their interpretation of it was, but that's what they assigned me. So I came up with like Blackfoot, the Blackfoot teepee design, and how they were grandmother moon and grandfather sun were passing down their knowledge through the elders, who were passing it on through to the next generations. And that was set in the winter time, because that was the time that people settled down for the winter. There was more time, because the rest of the year people were preparing to make it through the winter. So that's when those creation stories, or really long stories, were transferred down.
Wow. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It's kind of, there's a lot of, like, lost. Well, at least from in my communities.
Yeah.
Because everyone's it's still so demonized. Shamanism and spirituality.
Oh yes, it is in my community too. It's very, very Catholic. So I feel like they're also ashamed, because I was going to, I just had a blood memory when it came to my son's birth, on a number of things and ceremonies that needed to happen. And I told the doctors I need to keep the placenta because I need to bury it. And so I didn't know why at the time, but it is like a traditional practice of burying the placenta, and that kind of binds the baby to the earth so it doesn't go back to the spirit world. And so I kept the placenta, but COVID happened and there was all those restrictions. I couldn't go to Manitoba to bury it, even though I don't even know if that would be their traditional territory, because that's the reserve they were put on. I don't know. So, and the Saulteaux people were pushed westward in the past anyways. So, but I was told, like, you should go bury it on the traditional territory. But when I told my cousins that, they were like, no, 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 we don't do that here. I spoke with an Ojibwe elder in the US who told me, do what's in your heart and bury it where you see fit. Whatever your heart tells you, that's where it should go. So that was the demonizing. Like they're not into any of the traditional practices. It's all about God and religion. And I just always think like that's the religion that tortured you. And my grandfather, my great aunt, has apparently told stories of the nuns sharpening pencils and throwing them at her like a dartboard.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So I don't know who should be
A
demonized.
slow process.
Yeah, it definitely is.
You see it a lot in like tattoos too.
Yeah.
Of like the demonizing of them.
Oh, yes. I actually experienced that in my research with the Bedouin in Jordan as well. A lot of the older ladies had a lot of facial tattoos that had been done by, I think, Ottoman Turks, some said. So they had been done a long time ago. They didn't really know the specific meaning, but that was a traditional practice in the past, is that women had facial tattoos. I believe they probably had them on their arms as well, but they were covered. And then they had a nose piercing. And a lot of the people in their interviews talked about how they were so primitive in the past, and Muslim religious men came along and taught them the ways, and they were like, they just talked about themselves like they were savages before, and now they see the ways, but they can't get rid of their tattoos. And so you can see a lot of the older ladies had a hole there, and they've taken out their jewelry, but the tattoos remain. There was not a lot of younger women that had tattoos, which was a shame to me because they looked so stunning with their traditional tattoos.
That's heartbreaking.
It is, yeah.
You hear that a lot, hey? Like primitive or savage people.
Yeah.
Like
they were so ashamed of themselves when they should have just had so much pride in themselves. They're beautiful people, and they've been living a nomadic life way for thousands of years, and now they're being forced to be sedentary.
it was funny listening to you talk about professors, because
Yep.
that's how I'd like to.
You'd like to be a professor?
Yeah, like after
change things from the inside.
Oh, not even that. I just want to be a menace, I think.
Yeah.
Just like...
I know, I had that big dream too, and then just listening to them talk about their careers and urge me not to follow the same path, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll do other things. I would still love to get a PhD though.
That's crazy that there was like that little block, kind of, not like I guess a block, but what happened with Winnipeg and Manitoba universities.
Mm-hmm.
What was your thesis on?
I did a thesis called Ethno-Archaeological Perspectives on the Mortuary Practices of Jordanian Bedouin.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it was about 550 pages. If anybody wants to read it, it's on the internet. I often see well, there's a certain website which is like social media for academics, and they always tell me that I need to pay to see my mentions, but sometimes it says you've been mentioned by this person, and I'm like, oh, I love that academic. They're my hero.
Oh my goodness. That must be cool though.
Yeah, it's really cool. So it's people that are citing me in their research. So people have obviously read it, and they're using my research for their own written activities. So that's pretty cool.
That's like super
Especially
cool.
my supervisor was always telling me, this is really important research, Autumn. You're coming up with a method. You're coming up with a method for people to see nomadic people archaeologically on the landscape. because oftentimes they're ignored because they're considered ephemeral on the landscape. They're considered invisible. But if you look at their graves, that's like a set place on the landscape that they leave behind, and obviously they're not invisible.
Oh, no wonder you want to go up to the Inuit.
Yeah, I had one professor try to convince me, like, well, you don't have to do that research. You should come here and do research in the Arctic with me. And I thought about it. I really, really thought about it. I would love to do that as well.
You should.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. Wow. Well, my mom's community that she grew up in doesn't exist anymore.
Oh.
And that's only like 30 years ago.
Wow.
Or no, 40.
Things are changing really fast,
Yeah.
especially for nomadic communities. I would see that each year when I go back to do my research with the Bedouin.
Really?
How much things were changing, and I feel like they were in a process of being sedentarized because the king was giving them houses, and I think that was so people would, because there wasn't a lot of land ownership, so then people could start to own the land, and then they couldn't just travel freely, so they would live in these houses, but they didn't understand how to live in these spaces, so they would often bring their hair tents inside and kind of set it up the way they would live nomadically outside. And so I found that really interesting. And then some of them just like didn't love it, so they gave up their houses that the king gave them and just continued on their way. But I remember one year I came in, people had cell phones, obviously, but they would connect them to car batteries to charge them, and then they'd use that to set up a light at night. And then they would, like the following year, they had TV. They had a generator going between tents, the two tents of two brothers, with a generator, and they were watching Bedouin soap operas. And so things in the nomadic world really changed drastically.
That must have been so cool to watch that. Like,
it kind of made me sad because
yeah.
I loved the way they were living traditionally, and then just over a few short years, they were adopting all these other technologies and settling down.
That's wild. Yeah, but yeah, it's like, oh, okay.
I'm
Yeah,
all for
sad.
anybody living a traditional life way if they can.
That's great.
Yeah.
I got lots to think about that for that now. How are you going to do those excavations, like here in Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to incorporate more archaeology back into my life because it's been a few years now since I was laid off at the beginning of the pandemic, and then I kind of like switched careers. But I've been kind of working towards a second company called Sweetgrass Indigenous Services, but it would be small scale surveys more so in archaeology, and then I want to do traditional knowledge work, things like that. Some of the things that I was kept out of from other companies.
I saw that they were doing excavations in Ontario, the Anishinaabe.
Oh yeah.
That's how I got vandalized though.
Oh no.
Because you do like public weekend excavations.
Oh, is that where they get volunteers to come and work on it, or?
I think so. Like it's open to the public during certain hours to come, like, and they had to close it on weekends because it was the second time it got vandalized.
Oh.
Where people came and destroyed their equipment.
No.
And I don't think they destroyed any of the findings, but like all the equipment. I was like, why would
It's the same with some of the rock art sites. People will try to vandalize it. Or I don't know if you've been yet to the Big Rock outside of Calgary near Okotoks. You go out there, it's a sacred Blackfoot site with stories attached to it, and people are just using it for a rock climbing gym.
Sorry, I was taking in so much info. I'm trying to process. Got ADHD, so
no worries.
it's like a delayed. So I'm like There's so much. You do so much.
You know, jack of all trades.
It's cool. I feel like most kids growing up in the West are obsessed with Greece and Rome, like ancient Greece and Rome. What? I know I will.
I was really obsessed with dinosaurs until I was about 12, like probably from about the age of 5 when I learned to write till the age of 12 or 13. I was writing like the definitive encyclopedia of dinosaurs. And then I got really into Egyptology, and then so it was all mummies after that. I loved every moment of it. I used to like eat, sleep, and breathe archaeology.
Did you get to go to Egypt for it too?
What's that?
Did you get to go to Egypt for it too?
Yeah, I've been to Egypt, not to do archaeology, but just as part of my travels. So yeah, that was really amazing. I got to go inside the two of the pyramids at Giza.
Oh.
One of them, I think they only let 100 or 150 people in each day, so it was like a race against all the other tourists early in the morning. Me and my friend were legit running against a tourist bus trying to get there in time. Got up at 4 in the morning to walk to the pyramids, and we were asking people where are the pyramids, and they looked at us like, what are those? Just the most famous archaeological site in the world.
Have you gone to Mesoamerica?
Not really. Like, I think I stepped foot in Guatemala. And my parents took us on a cruise to Mexico once, so like that's the extent. I got off the ship for a few hours. But yeah, I haven't really done a lot of Mesoamerica. I did South America in 2017. I did Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru, and that was amazing.
Holy smokes!
Because I also love the mummies.
They have
in like Chile and Peru. I think I actually saw some in Bolivia too.
What is it about mummies that draws you?
I don't know. I think that they're still so lifelike, and I just want to know their story. I want to know all about the life that they lived.
It's crazy. So how do you learn about them how do you learn about them then?
Oh, there's so many different ways. They can do like isotope analyses. They can learn about the water that they were drinking, like, and where that water was located when they were, say, growing up. They can tell certain things about their health from their hair. Obviously, now ancient DNA studies are a big thing, so they can do DNA studies. They can do X-rays and different analyses to see their health internally, like see how their organs were functioning. It's almost a little bit like an autopsy.
Wow.
So, and then they can look at their bones. They could potentially see what kind of jobs they were doing, because repetitive tasks will leave certain markers on your bones. So, and then the bones are really important for seeing different diseases as well.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, there's just so much that they can learn from mummy studies. They could even potentially extract their last stomach contents.
That's nuts.
See their last meal.
Blew my mind. It's something that the Victorian Brits loved or thought that the mummified flesh would heal them.
Yes. They grind it up into the powder. Yeah, I feel like they did some interesting things with Egyptian mummies.
Yeah, they did.
They took off their wrappings and used them for something else.
They took too many of like the bad ideas from the Greeks too. Hey, like the traveling womb from Plato. There's just so bizarre. I used to love, like, I was like obsessed with the Greek philosophers.
Yeah, I was gonna say you probably learned a lot of their philosophies, because I feel like they really have continued influencing things through the ages.
Yeah, but then, you hear their bad ideas and they so far outweigh their good ideas that
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
just like, I don't want to even think about your good idea. Like, yeah, Aristotle too was like wildly bad in those senses, like Plato, and so I'm super into like the Eastern like philosophies, like ones um, um, Hinduism is my current kick.
Yeah.
I'm reading the Gita. Oh, what's the first word? I'm not sure, but it's just like a dialect between Krishna, like the one of the names for God, and Arjuna, like a warrior before battle.
Mm.
So it's just like a reflection on right action, the place of violence, and I had no idea yoga was just um, a path to fulfillment and not actually just different ways of practicing like movements.
Right.
So there's so much like misinformation about that,
Yeah.
or that meditation isn't just sitting and thinking. It can be anything.
I feel like people have made yoga a religion in itself.
Yeah, it's gone wild. Well, I've seen a lot of like those from the East getting upset with like the West's appropriation of Eastern
Yeah.
spirituality,
Right.
especially being like, hey, like, could you imagine if I was having a bad day, so I just went and got baptized? So, like
Yeah.
like, it's like what? It gets me. But there's so much connection I find between a lot of like various indigenous cultures and Eastern, and not separating spirituality and from religion, but also
Mm-hmm.
not separating religion from your everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's I've been kind of using it as a crutch to fill my disconnect in that sense of
Yeah.
Inuit spirituality.
I feel it like whenever I travel, you see all around the world that people have the same basic needs, and like people are more similar than they are different.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Envious. I hope to do what you've done in terms
There's
of
still time.
Oh, I hate planes though.
No. Oh yeah. That's understandable.
They're death traps.
Yeah.
They just fall. Like that's.
I know. I like want to kiss the ground every time I get off of one. Um, I was in New York City during September 11th in 2001, so like I got me and my ex at that time. He we went back the following year, but took a bus all the way to New York. It was like 63 hours each way or something ridiculous, and it really like gave me a fear of airplanes. I still travel with them, but anytime there's like any like jerky movement, any turbulence, and like hanging on for dear life.
I bet.
Yeah.
That's hardcore. You've had a crazy life.
Yeah. Just scratching the surface. I don't know
Okay.
why, but I changed my flight from leaving on September 11th to September 10th. And so I got there the evening before. So I used to vacation there each year. And then, yeah, I was
Whoa.
supposed to be at the World Trade Center site when everything went down, but I had been working for 2 months straight beforehand, and I was really burnt out. And then I woke up with like the humidity difference made me feel like I had a cold, so I laid in bed longer than my alarm. And then I started hearing about an air traffic control disaster on the radio, and just like got out of bed like and ran to the window, and then I saw the second plane hit. But I was very lucky. My brother got a hold of me. He had heard the news and managed to get a hold of me before all the cell towers went down, which were, I think, on the World Trade Center, one of them. And so it was like days after. I just like, tried calling home hundreds of times to say I was okay and couldn't get a hold of anybody. But I watched everything from the roof and the window that day, and I was about maybe like a kilometer away from the site, and I got trapped in the barricaded zone for 5 days and couldn't leave. Couldn't find a mask, I think, until the fourth day. So I grew these polyps in my nose afterwards, probably from the weird things I was breathing in. And it just like burned to breathe. So yeah, those crazy times. I left about 10 days after September 11th, which was like earlier than I was supposed to leave.
That's crazy. You changed like the flight change, the
Yeah,
like the
change.
humidity, like the not go in.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy how some things work out like that.
No. I felt so much survivor's guilt for a long time because I know had I been there at the time I was supposed to be there, I would have been in the buildings trying to save people. Because like for things like that, I don't care about myself enough. I'm trying to help other people, and um, so when I went back for the 1 year anniversary, I wrote a letter that I left on the site, and it was like an apology letter to the person that took my spot because I had such survivor's guilt. I'm starting to get over it and see that I have a purpose, but I just yeah, it was hard after that. Like why did it work out this way? Why wasn't I there when I was supposed to be? But it was kind of a miracle at the same time.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
So you had to watch. You watched it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I could feel before the buildings started to fall. I actually thought there was a bomb at the bottom because you could feel a rumbling before they actually fell. So it was like an earthquake before you knew that anything was going to go down. Like I never in a million years would have expected they'd start falling. The first one, I thought that was a fluke. The second one, that was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, and then just walking the streets afterwards, seeing people holding signs, looking for their loved ones, and all the missing posters. That was incredibly sad. And another time I went for a walk after I could leave the barricaded zone. Maybe it was still in the barricaded zone. I don't know. But these people from a French cafe came with these notices of if you have these things, please bring them to the pier, like bandages, all sorts of different things. And I remember arriving. It was relatively close to the site itself, so like there was a barricade around the edge of the site, and seeing a firefighter walking out of the site, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes, like he just had no hope left in his life. It was it was one of those life-changing moments that I'll never forget. It was crazy times, craziest day of my life. I think I've spoken to like one person who was from Calgary that was like, I think in the buildings at the time, and I was like, and we both had fellowships at the same time together, and like didn't know that about each other, and it was like, whoa. You kind of feel a bond then.
You guys met afterward, like.
Yeah,
Wow.
we didn't know, like we were working down the hall from each other for a year and had no idea that we shared a similar experience. It was one of those life-altering moments in history.
How important is it for you to, pass on the your culture to the next generation, your son?
Ooh, I feel like that's incredibly important. Like one of my most important jobs because so much was taken away in my family. Um, my dad's dad, my grandfather, who passed away before I was born, was I'm not quite sure, but he went to either residential school or Indian day school. And so he didn't really talk about culture or pass anything on to my dad. So it's something that I've been or discovering since I was a child. Like I I've always been super proud of who I am as an Indigenous person, even when it was not cool to be. um, and so it's like a lifelong learning process because so much was taken away. And because I grew up away from my family, I grew up here in Alberta rather than in Manitoba. Um, so I've taken Cree lessons because my son's father is Cree Métis, and then I'm Saulteaux Métis. So um, I've been kind of learning Cree and then Ojibwe so that I can pass that on to my son. So I teach him trilingually wherever I know the words. And then he's been learning teaching since he was in the womb, essentially, um, doing things related to the Midewin Society. And then he was learning cultural teachings through an agency since he was 3 months old. So that's incredibly important for me, is just to pass that on. So it's not as hard for him to reconnect as it is for other people who were kind of excluded from their culture. So yeah, I'm gonna keep doing my best, and I plan to register him in an Indigenous school when it comes that time, and uh, and keep learning for myself, learning the language for myself, and then keep learning all the teachings. As I said, it's a lifelong process when you've been disconnected. So um, I just I just hope it's so going to be so easy for him to then pass that on to the coming generations.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sotu? Is that how you say?
Soto.
Soto. Sorry,
Yeah.
Sotu. Soto. Soto.
Yeah.
Where's the traditional, where's the traditional territory?
Um, from what I understand, it was around like Sault Ste. Marie, so like Ontario, and then they got pushed westward, so they became the Plains Ojibwe.
Oh.
And then I feel like, from what I understand, they took on a little, like more traits of the Cree in Manitoba and westward. So yeah, we're kind of a segment of the Ojibwe people.
Okay. Ojibwe is like, is that like an umbrella? Kind of like there's a few
Yeah,
different groups that fit
people
in?
will also say Anishinaabe. So we would fall under that umbrella.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then in the United States, a lot of people will use the word Chippewa.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And then
I know I
there's,
had a lady, I recommended an Ojibwe elder to her, and then I think that her band goes by whatever band of Chippewas. So, but this person needed an Ojibwe elder specifically, and she said, "The elder you recommended to me, she wasn't Ojibwe," and I was like, "Yes, she is." They just, and I didn't realize at the time. Oh, I should specify. That's what they go by in the U.S.
that was great. Like how many nations? Oh, what was the other? How important is it to deconstruct the monolith of Indigenous culture? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, even I catch myself sometimes saying culture instead of cultures, but yeah, I recently spoke to somebody at a market, and my partner's Blackfoot, and then me being Saulteaux Métis. She kind of thought that there is just like one language, one culture, everything was the same. And it's really important to look at things nation to nation because there are so many differences. Even amongst Cree people, there's many different dialects, and if you go place to place, they might have different teachings. So it's incredibly important to recognize um, different nations for what they are. There are so many. It is so diverse, and Turtle Island is so vast. And I even I was in a webinar or a Zoom, and somebody was saying something. There was somebody in attendance who was an Indigenous person in Mexico, and I forget what the question was, but I just felt like there was that barrier because of these like borders that have been imposed, and Indigenous people of Canada not recognizing that Indigenous people in Mexico are also Indigenous with their own nations. So I think we have to recognize that there was these vast networks in the past. Things were being traded up from South America all the way into what is now Canada. So we have to recognize that we all come from the same people. I feel, and we need to stick together. We shouldn't create these barriers between each other.
Can you explain artivists?
Oh yes, that question. So artivist isn't a term that I came up with on my own, but I was doing another interview and somebody used the term calling me an artivist, and it fit because I always just said I do a lot of activist art. So I do a lot of art and photography that'll highlight Indigenous issues and realities, and try to foster a dialogue between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
How does that get received?
Uh, doing that style of art,
Yeah.
generally it's been received well. I although I don't generally get the bad comments. I think people might keep those to themselves for the most part, but yeah, it's been received really well, and a lot of people have told me that it opened their eyes to different things that they didn't know about and they wouldn't have known about if it wasn't for this visual imagery. And I feel like sometimes I'm not as eloquent with my words, but I can get my point across better if it's visual imagery. I can put more thought into it and more time into it, um, and oftentimes a lot more symbolism into it. There's often a lot of story within story.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It was nice outside though. This was nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
No worries.
No,
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for asking me. And
What was
I'm
fun.
glad I got to like meet you and talk to you, get to know you a little bit better.
Too. Well, yeah, we
I've
saw
been
your.
following you and your mom for so long, so.
Yeah, I'm glad. I never thought I'd be like an art collector, I guess, of sorts, but now
Yeah.
I can't stop.
Yeah.
I can't stop.
I know that feeling. Make arrows too.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
I'd like to
cool.
be able to teach people to make arrows someday.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I guess I didn't mention like one of the things I'm working towards is like having an Indigenous tourism business that would be like a land-based art retreat,
Oh.
and but also a place for Indigenous people to come work on their crafts, because like I've dealt with bylaw multiple times for having bison skulls in the backyard, and I had a friend deal with the police for cutting antler, and another friend kicked out of her studio for working with fish skin. So yeah, like
That'd be amazing.
people need to come and be able to work on their hide tanning or whatever they want to work on that's like kind of smelly. It's like I just want it to be a safe space for them to come. They don't have to pay whatever. Like just come, work on it, learn, do your thing.
That'd be cool as heck.
Yeah. Hopefully in the future.
The passion plan. Passion project.
Yeah, so hopefully like in the future I can teach arrow making. Make
Definitely.
bows and arrows. When I was in Yellowknife, I got a private tour of the museum and some of the stuff they took out of the ice patch. I had some friends who were doing ice patch archaeology,
Oh.
and it was amazing. They had like a whole preserved bow and arrow. Because usually as archaeologists, we just see the stone part. That's like what preserves, and the rest just disintegrates.
Whoa.
So, like we have the arrowhead, but we don't get to see the feathers attached. You don't get to see the stick it's made of. But yeah, they had some preserved. It was very cool.
Bad.
Highly recommend if you ever go there. Or Whitehorse, like take a private tour, behind the scenes tour of their collections.
Yeah, Whitehorse is some of my dream destinations.
Yeah.
Been everywhere in the north but Whitehorse. Like just about every little
I've never
small
been there
community.
either, but I hear it's so amazing.
That's it from us for Local Lives.
Oh, that's my son.